Jean, the night the phone rang. The sound did not feel like news. It felt like impact, the kind that knocks the air out of your chest before your mind can even form a sentence. Outside, the world still saw Michael Jordan as untouchable, the man who made arenas shake and turned a basketball into a global religion. But in that instant, none of it mattered. Not the trophies, not the bright commercials, not the chants that followed him like weather. What mattered was the one voice he had always returned to when doubt tightened around his ribs, the steady presence that had watched him grow from a restless boy in North Carolina into the most recognizable athlete on earth. And then that presence was gone. In the summer of 1993, at only 30 years old and sitting on top of the sport with 3 straight championships, Jordan faced a truth no legend is trained to survive. The world can applaud you at full volume while your private life collapses in silence. People remember the headlines, the shock, the retirement that followed, but they often miss the more unsettling question that hangs over the story even now, decades later. As Jordan turned 62, what happens to a man when the identity that fed him becomes too loud to live inside? And the grief he cannot control keeps returning at the worst possible moments. Because Jordan was never only a highlight reel, he was a pattern, a nervous system built on pressure, a mind that learned early that love could be warm and still demand something from you. He grew up in a household where discipline was not a slogan but a daily architecture, where work was measured, where character mattered, where you did not get to drift. His father, James Jordan, worked long days, and his mother, Dolores, carried her own load with an insistence on dignity that left no room for excuses. In that environment, Jordan did not learn comfort. He learned structure. And structure is what he would cling to later when life stopped making sense. Even as a child, he was surrounded by competition that felt personal, especially with an older brother who seemed stronger and faster, always just ahead, always forcing Michael to reach for a standard that refused to come closer. That is where the hunger was born, not as a glamorous ambition, but as a private itch, the feeling of being nearly enough but not quite, the fear that if you slow down you will disappear. Then came the moment that sealed it, the varsity cut when he was 15, the list on the wall without his name, the laughter in the hallway, and the walk home carrying a humiliation too heavy to share. He later admitted he cried alone in his room, not because he was weak, but because the rejection hit the one place he could not protect, the place that needed to be seen. And instead of collapsing, he turned that pain into repetition, dribble after dribble in the dark, promising himself that if the world stopped believing, he would start. That is the first version of Jordan that people love to romanticize, the underdog who refused to quit. But the darker truth is that this was also the beginning of a lifelong reflex. When something hurts, he does not talk, he works, he disappears into routine until the feeling becomes manageable. That reflex followed him to the University of North Carolina, where the pressure changed shape but never left. He arrived as a young man surrounded by other future stars, and even there he had to learn restraint inside Dean Smith's system, to wait, to be patient, to accept that being talented did not guarantee being central. Some nights he felt erased again, the same invisible kid staring at a list without his name, and he would call home to hear his father's calm voice pull him back to himself. Then, in 1982, the shot against Georgetown arrived like destiny, a moment so clean it made the future look inevitable, and suddenly the world began calling him special. But special comes with a bill. By the time he reached Chicago, the game did not merely test his body, it tested his identity. He became the face of an era, then the target of it, punished by Detroit, doubted by critics, chased by expectations that grew louder each year. And when he finally broke through, when he won in 1991 and kept winning through 1993, his fame expanded beyond sports into a cultural empire that never sleeps. That is why the loss in July 1993 landed differently. When his father was killed, it was not simply tragedy. It was the collapse of the one relationship that had always made the pressure survivable. After that, the arenas sounded hollow. The interviews felt unreal. The trophies did not comfort him. They only reminded him that the person he most wanted to share them with was gone. So when he stepped away from basketball at the peak in October 1993, the public tried to explain it with theories, fatigue, boredom, distraction, but the human explanation is simpler and more painful. He could not keep carrying the world while his own heart was breaking. And that is the doorway into the question that still matters at 62. Not what he achieved, but what it cost, what it took from him, and what parts of him he had to protect by turning his back on the very stage that made him immortal. When Michael Jordan walked away from basketball in October 1993, the world interpreted it as a shocking twist in a perfect script. Commentators debated motivation. Fans speculated about burnout. Some even whispered about hidden motives. But none of those narratives captured the internal reality. The retirement was not strategic. It was protective. At 30 years old, standing at the absolute summit of professional sport, Jordan had already experienced something few champions survive: reaching the peak and discovering that the view cannot heal you. The death of his father did not simply create grief. It destabilized the architecture of his identity. James Jordan had not just been a parent. He was the quiet witness behind every climb, the stabilizer when pressure distorted perspective, the reminder that the boy mattered more than the brand. Without that anchor, the noise of global fame stopped feeling like applause and started sounding like intrusion. Baseball became the refuge, not because it was easier and certainly not because it was glamorous. Minor league bus rides are not designed for legends. Empty stadiums do not bow to mythology. The Birmingham Barons did not offer redemption in the cinematic sense. They offered anonymity. They offered structure without worship. Jordan understood that in baseball he would not be worshipped. He would be doubted. And doubt felt honest. It felt grounded. For a man whose basketball dominance had turned him into a symbol rather than a person, stepping into a sport where he was vulnerable again was strangely stabilizing. Every at-bat was a small confrontation with humility. Every strikeout was public proof that greatness in one arena does not grant immunity in another. But that humility was not humiliation. It was recalibration. The public misread that chapter because they were still watching the myth. What they did not see were the quiet evenings when Jordan would sit alone and replay conversations with his father, searching for meaning in unfinished sentences. Grief is not dramatic most of the time. It is repetitive. It is a loop. It is waking up and remembering again. Baseball did not erase that loop. It gave it rhythm. There is something psychologically important about repetitive physical work during trauma. It narrows the mind. It creates a container for overwhelming emotion. Jordan did not need baseball to prove he was athletic. He needed it to prove he could survive himself without collapsing. When he returned to the NBA in March 1995 with the now famous two-word statement, "I'm back," it sounded triumphant. In truth, it was restrained. He did not give a speech. He did not explain his grief. He simply stepped back into the only arena where his instincts had ever fully aligned with his identity. But this version of Jordan was different. Observers noticed it immediately. He was leaner, quieter, more guarded. The smile was rarer. The competitive fire was still there, but it was colder. The return was not about reclaiming dominance. It was about restoring coherence. Basketball was the one place where the fragments still fit. The 1995 to 1996 season became a declaration. The Chicago Bulls finished 72-10, the best regular season record in NBA history at that time. Analysts framed it as revenge. Fans framed it as destiny fulfilled. But psychologically, it was a man reasserting control in a world that had taken something he could never replace. Control is not just about winning games. It is about reducing chaos. On the court, Jordan could dictate tempo, spacing, outcome. Off the court, fate had proven uncontrollable. That contrast is essential to understanding why he pushed his body and mind to extremes. The pursuit of perfection was not vanity. It was stability. The iconic moments from that second three-peat, especially the 1997 Finals performance often referred to as the flu game, have been immortalized as examples of superhuman will. But what makes that image enduring is not the 38 points. It is the fragility visible underneath. Jordan leaning into Scottie Pippen at the end of the game was not an act of weakness. It was exposure. For a second, the invincible persona slipped, and the audience saw effort bordering on collapse. That image matters because it humanized the myth without diminishing it. It revealed that resilience is not the absence of vulnerability. It is movement through it. By 1998, as the Bulls approached their sixth championship, the internal fatigue was measurable. Teammates were aging. Management tensions were rising. The dynasty was visibly unstable. Jordan's final shot in Game 7 of the 1998 Finals has been dissected endlessly. The crossover, the step back, the release. But what made it historic was not aesthetics. It was authorship. Jordan chose the ending. After a career repeatedly shaped by external forces, draft position, physical punishment, personal tragedy, he seized narrative control in the final seconds. That matters. For individuals driven by high agency, choosing when to exit is psychologically critical. When he retired again in 1999, it felt more complete. But life after peak performance is rarely peaceful. The absence of structured competition can expose unresolved emotional residue. Jordan's transition into ownership, particularly with the Charlotte Hornets, reflected another adaptation. He was no longer competing on the court. He was competing through governance and strategy. The drive did not disappear. It transformed. Ownership gave him influence without physical risk. It also gave him distance from the daily grind that once consumed him. As he moved into his 40s and 50s, the cumulative losses began to reframe his priorities. The divorce from Juanita Van Noy in 2006 was not loud in tone, but heavy in implication. 13 years of marriage had unfolded under the relentless spotlight of global fame. While headlines fixated on the financial settlement, the deeper story was time. Elite performance at that level requires obsession. Obsession reallocates presence. Presence is the currency relationships depend on. Jordan later acknowledged, in restrained terms, that he wished he had been home more. That statement is not dramatic. It is honest. By the time he remarried and welcomed twin daughters in 2014, the psychological landscape had shifted. Age alters ambition. It does not eliminate competitiveness, but it contextualizes it. At 62, Jordan's life is less about assertion and more about preservation. His wealth, now estimated in the multi-billion-dollar range, reflects decades of strategic ownership rather than salary accumulation. But the more telling transformation is behavioral. He appears less frequently. He guards privacy more deliberately. He invests in philanthropy without performance. The fire remains, but it is contained. So what happened to Michael Jordan at 62? Nothing collapsed. Nothing scandalous erupted. What happened was subtler and more profound. The man who once converted pain into dominance learned to convert it into boundaries. He no longer needs to win rooms. He no longer needs to answer every debate. The silence that once felt suffocating now feels chosen. And for someone whose life was defined by noise, that shift may be the most meaningful victory of all. By the time Michael Jordan entered his 40s, something fundamental had shifted inside him, though the public barely noticed. The headlines still treated him as a living monument, the standard by which all new greatness would be measured. Debate shows recycled his championships like scripture. Younger stars were introduced as the next Jordan, as if identity could be inherited. But internally, the question he faced was no longer about comparison. It was about continuity. How does a man built on competition survive in a world where the competition that defined him no longer exists in the same form? After his second retirement in 1999 and his later return with the Washington Wizards from 2001 to 2003, Jordan confronted a difficult psychological truth. Performance has an expiration date. The Wizards chapter was not about restoring myth. It was about confronting mortality in real time. At 38, then 39, then 40, he was no longer defying physics. He was negotiating with it. His knees reminded him daily of accumulated impact. His recovery time lengthened. The speed that once felt effortless now required management. And yet he stepped back on the court anyway, not because he needed validation, but because he was testing something deeper. Could he still feel alive in the arena without being invincible? That distinction matters. In his Chicago years, Jordan's dominance created the illusion of immunity. In Washington, he was visibly human. He bled. He limped. He endured younger opponents who grew up idolizing him and now attacked him without reverence. Some observers dismissed that era as unnecessary. But psychologically, it was instructive. It forced Jordan to compete without the armor of inevitability. It required him to redefine what effort meant when perfection was no longer possible. That is a different kind of courage. When he finally stepped away for good in 2003, it was quieter than the previous exits. No dramatic two-word announcement. No seismic shock. Just acknowledgement. The body had reached its limit. The era had concluded. And with that closure came an unfamiliar space. One without daily structure, without opponents, without the ritual of preparation that had anchored his identity since adolescence. Many elite performers struggle in this phase. The nervous system accustomed to intensity can misinterpret calm as emptiness. The absence of applause can feel like erasure. Jordan avoided that vacuum by shifting arenas again. Ownership became the next battlefield. In 2010, he became majority owner of the Charlotte Hornets, making him the first former player to hold a controlling stake in an NBA franchise. To the public, it was a business move. Internally, it was continuity. Competition reappeared, only now it was strategic, financial, structural. The stakes were different, but the pattern was familiar. Study weaknesses, make adjustments, pursue leverage. Ownership, however, does not offer the same emotional clarity as playing. Wins are collective. Losses are systemic. There is no final shot to redeem a season. For over a decade, Jordan navigated that environment, learning that control in the boardroom is slower, less visceral, and more political than control on the hardwood. And in 2023, when he sold his majority stake in the Hornets while retaining a minority share, it signaled another evolution. He was not abandoning influence. He was redistributing it. The decision reflected something consistent in his later life. He no longer clings. He transitions. Meanwhile, the world around him continued to change. Social media amplified every comparison. Documentary culture reframed his past. The Last Dance in 2020 reignited debates about leadership, intensity, and the cost of excellence. For younger viewers, it introduced Jordan as both icon and enigma. For Jordan himself, it reopened memories he had compartmentalized. Watching archival footage of his younger self, relentless, demanding, sometimes ruthless, must have carried a strange duality. Pride and distance, recognition and unfamiliarity. The competitor remained inside him, but age creates perspective that youth cannot access. Then came January 2020 and the loss of Kobe Bryant. The tragedy reverberated differently. Kobe was not merely a peer. He was a mirror from another generation, someone who absorbed Jordan's ethos and translated it into his own language. Their relationship was layered: mentorship, rivalry, fraternity. When Kobe died, Jordan was forced to confront grief that echoed 1993. Another father figure lost? No, but another bond forged in shared obsession, gone without warning. At the memorial, when Jordan's voice broke and he admitted that a piece of me went with him, it was one of the rare times the public saw his composure fracture. Grief accumulates. It does not replace itself. It layers. By his early 60s, Jordan had buried his father, his close friend and security confidant Gus, and now a younger brother in spirit. Each loss reinforced the same lesson. Control is conditional. You can dominate opponents. You cannot negotiate with time. At 62, Jordan's life appears insulated. His net worth, estimated in the billions, places him in a category few athletes have ever entered. His Jordan brand continues to generate immense annual revenue, transforming a 1980s endorsement gamble into a multi-decade cultural engine. His investments, from private equity to motorsports ventures like 2311 Racing, demonstrate calculated diversification. The architecture of his wealth is designed for endurance. It compounds quietly. It does not depend on physical performance. But the external metrics are not the core of this chapter. The deeper transformation is behavioral. Those who observe him closely note restraint. Fewer interviews, fewer public reactions, greater emphasis on privacy. He does not chase visibility. He curates it. That shift is not withdrawal. It is boundary setting. For a man whose youth was consumed by public demand, choosing invisibility at times is an act of autonomy. Family has also taken on a different shape. His older children are adults navigating their own identities. His younger twin daughters are growing up in a world hyper-aware of their father's legacy. Jordan's role now is not provider of spectacle, but provider of steadiness. Presence over performance. Patience over proof. He has spoken, sparingly, about wishing he had been home more during his playing years. That acknowledgement is not self-punishment. It is recalibration. At 62, he measures success differently. Physically, aging is undeniable. His posture is more guarded. His movements deliberate. Training now prioritizes longevity rather than dominance. Golf has replaced grueling preseason workouts as a daily competitive outlet. The fire remains. Competitors rarely extinguish it, but it is managed rather than unleashed. So what happened to Michael Jordan at 62? He did not fall. He did not fade. He integrated. The man who once converted pain into relentless output has learned to convert it into structure and choice. He understands that greatness without boundaries erodes. He understands that ownership means more than equity. It means protecting the parts of life that cannot be monetized. Perhaps the most profound shift is this. In his youth, Jordan fought to prove he belonged. In his prime, he fought to prove he was the best. In his later years, he no longer fights to prove anything. He chooses where to invest energy. He chooses when to speak. He chooses what to protect. And in that quiet authority lies a version of strength that does not require applause. By the time Michael Jordan crossed into his 60s, the mythology around him had become almost self-sustaining. His name no longer required explanation. It functioned like a symbol, shorthand for excellence, obsession, dominance. But mythology can be isolating. When you're frozen in cultural memory as the apex competitor, people forget that time continues to move through you like it does through everyone else. At 62, Jordan is no longer battling defenders. He is negotiating with legacy. One of the least discussed realities of extreme success is the loneliness embedded within it. During his prime, isolation was disguised as focus. The long hours and empty gyms were framed as dedication. The emotional distance was framed as leadership. But decades later, those same habits can become structural walls. When you train yourself to compartmentalize emotion in order to win, you don't automatically regain emotional fluency once the competition stops. Jordan's later life reflects a gradual, deliberate unwinding of that conditioning. This is visible in the way he handles power now. For years, ownership of the Charlotte Hornets symbolized extension, proof that his influence had evolved beyond playing. Yet in 2023, when he sold his majority stake while retaining a minority share, it marked something subtle but important. It was not defeat. It was prioritization. Owning an NBA franchise requires relentless engagement, political navigation, and emotional stamina. Stepping back signaled a recalibration of energy. At 62, he is less interested in controlling systems and more interested in preserving equilibrium. Financially, Jordan's position is extraordinary. His net worth, estimated in the multi-billion-dollar range, is anchored primarily in ownership and long-term brand equity rather than earned salary. The Jordan brand remains a global revenue engine, generating billions annually. This matters because it represents durability. He is not dependent on reinvention for relevance. His wealth compounds in silence, and that silence is something he appears to value more than visibility. The contrast between his early fame and current lifestyle is striking. In the 1990s, Jordan existed in a constant storm of cameras, endorsements, public scrutiny, and expectation. Every movement carried symbolic weight. Now, his physical environment reflects containment. His residence in Jupiter, Florida, inside a highly private golf community, is structured for seclusion rather than spectacle. The estate is expansive but concealed, designed to eliminate intrusion rather than attract admiration. Privacy has become infrastructure. There is something psychologically telling about that choice. For much of his life, Jordan's schedule was externally dictated: practice, travel, media, sponsorship commitments. Control over time was limited. Today, autonomy over time is his most valuable asset. He can disappear for weeks without consequence. He can decline invitations without explanation. The man who once competed nightly in front of millions now curates absence as a form of strength. Age has also reshaped his relationship with competition. The fire has not extinguished. Competitors rarely lose that instinct, but it is redirected. Golf, business negotiations, strategic investments. These are arenas where he can channel intensity without sacrificing physical health. There's less urgency to prove, more emphasis on sustainability. Physically, the signs of time are visible. His gait is heavier than in his playing days. His body language more reserved. The explosive athleticism that defined his youth has been replaced by measured movement. For someone whose identity was built on physical supremacy, aging could have been destabilizing. Instead, it appears integrated. He no longer attempts to outrun time. He adapts around it. Family life now occupies a more central psychological position. His older children are adults navigating public and private identities under the shadow of his legacy. His younger twin daughters are growing up in a different era, one saturated by social media and digital permanence. Jordan's role has shifted from provider of spectacle to guardian of normalcy. He has spoken sparingly but honestly about wishing he had been more present during earlier years of fatherhood. That reflection is not performative regret. It is recalibration based on experience. The philanthropic commitments he has made in recent years further reveal this evolution. Large-scale donations to initiatives focused on racial equality, medical access, and community development reflect a strategic approach to impact. Rather than aligning himself with short-term visibility campaigns, he funds infrastructure, clinics, long-term grants, sustained programming. It is philanthropy designed for endurance, mirroring the structure of his wealth. Another layer, shaping his life at 62, is memory. Publicly, he is celebrated constantly. Privately, he carries the accumulation of loss. His father, close confidants, former competitors. The death of Kobe Bryant in 2020 reopened emotional territory that had never fully closed since 1993. Grief at this stage of life is different. It is less chaotic, but more reflective. It prompts questions about time remaining rather than time lost. Jordan's current posture suggests acceptance rather than defiance. In youth, he met adversity with aggression. In midlife, he met it with restructuring. In later years, he meets it with boundaries. He does not chase commentary. He does not engage in every debate comparing eras or players. He allows his legacy to stand without constant defense. That restraint may be the most telling transformation of all. So what happened to Michael Jordan at 62? The myth remained intact. The empire remained stable. The wealth expanded. But internally, the shift is profound. He is no longer competing to dominate perception. He is competing to preserve meaning. He has transitioned from building a legacy to protecting it, from seeking victory to choosing peace. And in a life defined by relentless pursuit, the decision to slow down, to withdraw selectively, to prioritize presence over performance, may be the most disciplined move he has ever made. By the time Michael Jordan reached his early 60s, the narrative surrounding him had hardened into something almost untouchable. 6 championships, global brand dominance, billionaire status, cultural immortality. But if you strip away the architecture of success, what remains is a man who has spent most of his life learning how to survive intensity. And survival, over decades, changes shape. Part of what defines Jordan at 62 is not what he has gained, but what he has consciously reduced. In his playing years, excess was structural. Excessive travel, excessive scrutiny, excessive pressure, excessive expectation. The Air Jordan empire, while financially transformative, also functioned as an amplifier. Every shoe release was an event. Every playoff series was a referendum. Every silence was interpreted as strategy. There was no neutral space. The world demanded engagement, demanded performance, demanded constant proof that the legend was still intact. Now, that demand still exists, but his response to it has changed. One of the most revealing elements of Jordan's later life is his relationship with visibility. He does not chase interviews. He does not flood social media. He does not offer weekly commentary on modern players. This is deliberate. For someone whose prime years were defined by overexposure, controlled absence has become a form of psychological preservation. Silence, once forced by grief, is now chosen as discipline. There is also a strategic dimension to this restraint. The less he speaks, the more his words retain weight. The fewer appearances he makes, the more significant each one becomes. This is not accidental. It reflects a mature understanding of brand endurance. At 62, Jordan is no longer building relevance. He is maintaining mystique. And mystique is a rare asset in the digital age. Financially, his empire has evolved beyond athletic association. The Jordan brand continues to produce billions in annual revenue, extending his influence into new generations that never saw him play live. Ownership stakes, strategic investments, and motorsports ventures like 23XI Racing demonstrate diversification beyond basketball identity. This matters because it reduces dependency. His wealth is not fragile. It does not rely on nostalgia. It is structured to outlast him. But financial durability does not eliminate emotional reality. The cumulative losses he has experienced continue to inform his behavior. His father's death in 1993 did not simply mark a tragic event. It permanently altered his relationship with control. The loss of Gus, the security figure who helped stabilize him during vulnerable years, reinforced that fragility. Kobe Bryant's death in 2020 added another layer. Not only grief, but confrontation with generational transition. When someone who mirrored your competitive soul disappears, it forces you to reckon with your own mortality in a way statistics cannot quantify. At 62, Jordan lives with that awareness. He is no longer racing against opponents. He is aware of time. There is a distinct difference between ambition at 32 and ambition at 62. In youth, ambition is expansive. You chase more. In later life, ambition contracts. You protect what matters. That contraction is visible in how he structures family life. With his older children grown and his twin daughters still young, Jordan occupies two generational roles simultaneously. He is both father of adults and father of children. That dynamic requires flexibility. In earlier decades, his schedule was dictated by seasons and sponsorships. Now, it is dictated by choice. He can attend. He can remain. He can withdraw from public demands when family requires priority. This shift may appear subtle externally, but psychologically it represents integration. Integration means he is no longer splitting identity between Michael Jordan the competitor and Michael Jordan the person. In earlier phases, those identities often conflicted. Competitive drive demanded sacrifice. Presence demanded patience. At 62, patience appears more dominant. There's also something important about how he handles comparisons. In modern sports discourse, debates about the greatest of all time are constant. New stars rise. Metrics evolve. Social media fuels argument. Jordan does not aggressively enter those battles. He rarely inserts himself into comparison cycles. That detachment signals confidence, not indifference. He understands that legacy is not defended through argument. It is preserved through endurance. Physically, he manages his body with realism. The punishing training regimens of his Chicago years have been replaced by maintenance-focused routines. Golf occupies much of his competitive outlet. Controlled conditioning replaces explosive output. The body that once absorbed relentless contact now demands preservation. For someone who once weaponized physicality, accepting limitation is a form of maturity. And perhaps the most revealing evolution is his relationship with ego. In his prime, ego was fuel. It sharpened focus. It sustained intensity. It created internal narratives that transformed slights into motivation. At 62, ego is quieter. He does not need public affirmation to validate identity. The drive remains, but it is no longer reactive. It is internal and moderated. This does not mean he has softened into passivity. Those close to him still describe competitiveness in business decisions, in golf matches, in negotiations. But the aggression is measured. It is applied selectively rather than reflexively. So what happened to Michael Jordan at 62? He became deliberate. The boy who once cried alone after being cut for varsity built a life around proving he belonged. The man in his 30s built a dynasty around proving he was superior. The man in his 60s no longer proves. He protects. He protects time. He protects family. He protects privacy. He protects the integrity of a legacy that no longer needs constant reinforcement. The world may still see him as Air Jordan, the immortal silhouette suspended above the rim. But at 62, the more meaningful image is quieter. A man who has learned that the hardest competition is not against opponents, but against imbalance. And for the first time in his life, balance appears to be the goal. By 62, Michael Jordan no longer moves like a man chasing something. He moves like a man who understands exactly what he is willing to carry and what he is not. That distinction may be the most important evolution of his entire life. For decades, Jordan absorbed pressure as if it were oxygen. Criticism became fuel. Doubt became architecture. Even tragedy became something he attempted to outwork. But time has a way of teaching even the most relentless competitors that not every weight should be lifted. Some must be set down deliberately. One of the quietest but most profound changes in Jordan's later years is his recalibration of identity. In his 20s and 30s, identity was performance-based. He was what he did. The game validated him. The scoreboard measured him. Victory affirmed him. That framework is intoxicating and dangerous, because when performance declines, identity can fracture. Jordan avoided that fracture not by denying aging, but by restructuring meaning. Instead of anchoring identity in output, he anchored it in ownership, literal and psychological. Ownership of business ventures, ownership of brand equity, ownership of time, ownership of narrative. That shift allowed him to step back from physical dominance without experiencing existential collapse. When he sold his majority stake in the Charlotte Hornets in 2023, retaining a minority share, it symbolized more than a financial transaction. It was acknowledgement. He no longer needed to sit at the head of the table to feel relevant. Relevance was already secured. Letting go of control, partially, strategically, reflects maturity that younger Jordan might have resisted. And then there is the subject of mortality. Loss accumulates differently in your 60s than it does in your 30s. In youth, loss feels catastrophic and destabilizing. In later life, it becomes reflective. The deaths of his father and close confidants shaped his early adulthood. The death of Kobe Bryant forced a confrontation with generational fragility. Watching someone who mirrored his competitive soul vanish at 41 reframed Jordan's sense of timeline. It underscored that legacy is not immunity. At 62, Jordan lives with that awareness. Not publicly, not theatrically, but structurally. You see in how he invests. Long-term commitments to philanthropy, including large-scale funding for racial equality initiatives and community health clinics, indicate forward planning. These are not impulsive gestures. They are institutional contributions designed to persist beyond him. It reflects a shift from accumulation to allocation. You also see it in how he handles absence. Jordan is rarely visible unless he chooses to be. He does not chase documentary cycles. He does not flood interviews to defend ranking debates. He does not attempt to dominate modern discourse. That restraint suggests confidence that legacy can endure without constant maintenance. And perhaps more importantly, it suggests he no longer equates silence with vulnerability. In his younger years, silence was often strategic tension. Now it is preference. Privacy has become a protected asset. His residence in Florida, within a highly secured golf community, is structured for isolation. This is not reclusiveness. It is intentional design. The man who once could not walk through an airport without chaos now values controlled space above all. Family life appears to anchor him in ways competition once did. With adult children charting their own paths and younger daughters growing up in a hyperdigital era, Jordan occupies a protective role. There is an awareness that fame is no longer containable in the same way it was in the 1990s. Technology magnifies exposure. Being present, attentive, and grounded carries different stakes now. Observers who interact with him often note that the fire remains. Competitive instinct does not evaporate. It has simply narrowed its focus. Whether on a golf course or in business negotiations, the edge is visible, but it is no longer volatile. It is calibrated. This calibration is perhaps the most revealing trait of Jordan at 62. The intensity that once overwhelmed teammates, intimidated opponents, and defined locker rooms is now applied selectively. He chooses battles rather than inventing them. He engages when necessary rather than reflexively. There is also an emotional integration that appears more stable. In earlier decades, Jordan compartmentalized. Pain was redirected into productivity. Doubt was suppressed through repetition. Now, there's less urgency to transform every feeling into output. Reflection has replaced reaction. And this may be the most understated transformation of all. The man who once lived on the edge of internal combustion now operates with equilibrium. He understands that domination is unsustainable long-term. Preservation is strategic. Longevity is victory. So what happened to Michael Jordan at 62? He did not decline. He did not unravel. He did not fade. He transitioned from conquering external arenas to mastering internal balance. The silhouette remains iconic, frozen midair, suspended above gravity. But the more compelling image today is grounded. A man walking deliberately, aware of time, conscious of boundaries, choosing what to protect. And in that choice lies a different kind of greatness. Quieter, steadier, less visible, but perhaps more enduring than any championship banner ever raised. At 62, Michael Jordan does not look like a man in crisis. He does not look like a fallen titan. He looks, instead, like someone who has finally understood the bill for greatness and paid it. For most of his life, Jordan lived in forward motion. Every slight was converted into velocity. Every loss became blueprint. Every doubt became ignition. That forward motion created championships, empires, global mythology. But forward motion also postpones reflection. You do not pause when you are chasing history. You pause when history is already behind you. And that is where Jordan stands now. Not ahead of the world, not behind it, but outside its constant race. The real question is not what happened to Michael Jordan. The better question is, what happens when a man who defined an era no longer needs to define anything? At 62, Jordan exists in a rare psychological space. He has nothing left to prove. That is not a cliché. It is structural reality. The debates about the greatest of all time continue, but they no longer require his participation. The brand continues to generate billions. His financial foundation is insulated. His cultural footprint is permanent. When you remove the necessity of proving, what remains is choice. And Jordan has become a man of choices. He chooses when to appear. He chooses when to speak. He chooses where to invest. He chooses what to ignore. This level of autonomy is the ultimate luxury, more valuable than contracts, rings, or endorsements. In his youth, time controlled him. In his prime, expectations controlled him. In his later years, he controls time. There's also something deeply human in how his story has softened. The younger Jordan weaponized intensity. Teammates have described the psychological pressure he imposed, the relentless standard, the refusal to accept mediocrity. That intensity was necessary then. It built dynasties. But at 62, intensity has evolved into discernment. He no longer imposes pressure to win games. He applies pressure only where it matters. That evolution may be the most emotional part of his story, because the boy who once cried alone after being cut from varsity spent decades proving he was enough. The man who lost his father at the peak of fame spent years proving he could endure loss. The competitor who returned from baseball exile proved he could reclaim dominance. The owner proved he could operate beyond the court. Each phase required confrontation. Now, confrontation is internal. There is a certain stillness that arrives when you understand your own arc. Jordan's life has followed a clear trajectory. Rejection, rise, rupture, return, reinvention. The public consumed each chapter as spectacle. But at 62, the spectacle is irrelevant. What matters is integration. Integration means the myth and the man coexist without conflict. He is both the silhouette and the father, both the billionaire and the son who still carries absence, both the competitor and the husband trying to remain present. Time has thinned the noise. What remains is identity stripped of urgency. It is important to understand that this stage is not passive. It is intentional. He invests in long-term philanthropy, not for applause, but for permanence. He supports initiatives in underserved communities, not because it enhances image, but because he understands structural inequity from lived experience. His commitments extend beyond checks. They extend into architecture. He builds institutions rather than headlines. There is also a generational awareness shaping his later years. He has watched basketball evolve. He has watched culture accelerate. He has watched fame become algorithmic rather than organic. Yet he does not attempt to outpace it. He allows new eras to unfold without interference. That restraint is power, because when you have truly defined a standard, you no longer need to defend it. Physically, he moves differently. The body that once floated seems grounded now. But grounding is not weakness. Is gravity accepted? He does not attempt to defy age. He adapts to it. And adaptation is a form of intelligence. Emotionally, he appears more measured. The sharp edges that once cut through locker rooms are now smoothed by time. Those who encounter him describe humor, focus, guarded warmth. The fire still exists. It always will, but it no longer needs to scorch. So what happened to Michael Jordan at 62? He became aware. Aware that greatness does not shield you from loss. Aware that dominance is temporary, but reputation can endure. Aware that wealth is security, but presence is meaning. Aware that silence can be stronger than argument. And perhaps most importantly, aware that survival at the summit requires surrender. Not surrender to weakness, but surrender to balance. The world still sees him as Air Jordan, suspended midair in eternal flight. But the truth is more grounded and more powerful. He has landed. Not fallen. Landed. And in landing, he has achieved something rarer than championships. He has built a life that does not depend on applause. That is what happened to Michael Jordan at 62. Not collapse. Not scandal. Not decline.